Welcome back for another episode of the DDI podcast. My name's Mark Yeeles. I'm the Vice President for Schneider Electric's Secure Power Division here in the UK and Ireland. My guest today is Garry Connolly, founder of Digital Infrastructure Ireland, an organisation looking to build a smarter, greener and sustainable digital future alongside industry leaders and experts from around the globe. Here's what to expect today.
To me, we're in very much the early to early mid stage of this industrial age, driven by data. So the analogy of the body is probably a good one. The physical heart is one thing, that's the center. The blood that actually does all the magic to your fingertips is the data. If your heart stops beating, it doesn't matter how good your blood is, you're dying. The writer said that, when you have a volcano, before a volcano, there's little tremors. We're only at the tremor stage. Anything that says smart, anything you buy in 2025 that says smart in, smart car, smart device, smart heat pump, smart, it's only smart because of one thing: data.
Garry, welcome to the show.
Thanks very much, Mark. I nearly had to take a second listen there because digital. I think this is going to be the first time I'm introduced as Digital Infrastructure Ireland.
There you go.
Yeah, because
there you go. The new branding. It's the new branding, the new thing.
Yeah, rebrand. We've all grown up and we've worked out what we think we might want to do, and now we're going to call ourselves Digital Infrastructure Ireland, which is great.
I love that.
Wonderful.
I love that.
Well, yeah.
Well, the last time we were talking together, we were talking about being neighbourly. If you remember right. Yeah. So you may see a slight theme of that come through the pod today. So let's be nice neighbours on this one, hey? So, Garry, let's get stuck in. So, when I think about Garry, the big personality, leading the way in Ireland around digital infrastructure. But one thing our listeners may not know is, a little bit about you as a person. So how did you end up in this mad world of digital infrastructure?
What a great question, because like lots of people, certainly when I was in school and college, I didn't have an epiphany and say, I want to get into this area. Like most, I sort of knew what I didn't want to be more than what I wanted to be. So through the long and the short, to be honest, Mark, I ended up graduating as the world's worst COBOL programmer. That's my claim to fame. At 21, I was absolutely certified as the world's worst COBOL programmer, bar none. But again, what I realized in the 3 years in college was that great programmers, like great engineers, often love to find a problem that may or may not have a solution. Or the opposite, should I say, a solution that may not have a problem. And more so than anything was the fact that the communication skills of this group, which were fantastic, and they could get a keyboard, mouse to run anywhere on a screen and stuff, but they couldn't actually traverse across and maybe sit with a group of people or business people or departmental leads that had a challenge. And the language they use, and maybe we can talk about it later, but the language that engineers and programmers and stuff use, and the language the rest of us use, it's like different. It's like Chinese, Mandarin, and English. So I found this lovely space, Mark, in the middle, where I sort of knew what the limitations were of COBOL. I knew what the things it could do, but then I could also communicate that as a solution to a problem, or how we could solve problems in the real business world. And that's how I found myself in the middle, I guess, of a systems integration type role from early on. Terrible at the programming, but not so bad at the understanding and communicating that to real world challenges that businesses and people and departments have. So that's really how I ended up in this digital infrastructure world. And I just kept going from floppy disks, or whatever it was then, Mark. Was it punch cards? It was. From punch cards from punch cards to floppy disks to CD-ROMs to the cloud, and here I am now, effectively part of a group of people who design, build, and operate large floppy disks on steroids.
Well, I like the way you just described that. We'll hold that thought for our PR discussion a little bit later. I do want to ask you a question, however, because I think you've already raised a really important point there, which is the ability to take something that is quite complex and make it quite simple for somebody else to understand. And I think
Mm.
you kind of highlighted that there. Maybe inverted commas, the world's worst programmer, but managed to see what that program and what that the ability of that program could do, and translate what it was to position it with anyone else who's prepared to listen at that point in time. How big a skill, Gary, do you think that is in this industry that we work in?
Do you know? I think it's across all industries that are in the infrastructure or building stuff space. Because predominantly we find that the people in on and around it are engineering types. And whilst
Okay.
I'm no psychologist, I think that if you were to look at those types, and we don't want to label people too early, they have really great analytical brains, left side of the brains, but maybe not as great in storifying the whole solution or storifying things. That's why I think, Mark, I love history. If there was one particular um, course I did in school, I just loved history. I wasn't really into the whole dates of when someone was born and when they died and how many children they had and all that. I was just more interested in the parallels and similarities of what they were trying to achieve. And I think one of the things that we miss in 2025, describing the role data has, is that to me, we're in very much the early to early mid stage of this industrial age, driven by data. And when you explain that to someone, they think, oh, is it data and it's just Facebook and is it WhatsApp? No, no, it's a utility. And people can't understand that, right? So we then have to look at history, don't we? When we say, well, what, if we're in the fourth industrial age, what was the first one? That's a great way to start, right?
How about that?
Because we,
Yeah.
yes, because we can't future. Most of us can't see the future, rightly so, but we can reflect on the past, can't we? So making things tangible, Mark, making things tangible. Making things like, okay, well, this industrial age is driven by data. Okay, well, what was the first one? Well, actually, steam. The challenge was that the mines were over flooding as they were going down into them with water. That was the challenge. They wanted coal. They wanted the coal to drive the industrial age. So they designed a pump, right? And the pump used steam to act as a piston to draw the water out so they could go deeper. So what was the catalyst? Steam. So they saw, oh, that's good. They turned that steam then into locomotives, ships, and all other forms of transport. But the steam was the catalyst. The next industrial age, as we know, was driven by electricity. Same thing. It wasn't necessarily the cables or the transformers or the substations. It was the electricity that changed what people can do, how, and where. The third one was driven, would you believe, by microchips. Yeah, microchips from around 1970. Again, and then we've now evolved to 2025, where today's equivalent for changing society, for changing sectors, for changing our own lives and all the rest of it is data, which is the equivalent of the steam. It's transformative. So therefore, that's the bit that sometimes when we're communicating, Mark, and I know you work for a wonderful organization called Schneider, and I listen intently for the keynotes, not to talk about PUE. And because that is to me, I coined a phrase recently for your listeners, obviously, and it's cross discipline. That's a metric that often it's a KPI, I guess you'd call it,
Uh-huh.
for measuring efficiency and stuff. But I actually have renamed it PUE, and when I revert, I try and say, please use English.
So there you go. So there's the three-letter acronym library laid right out on the table right there. And
Ru-
you touched on a couple of points there. So I just want to bring us back just so and hopefully you can give a couple of examples. So where have you seen because you're right, digital tech does impact change, and it will. Now we see it every day, but what, people in the public domain, or or where you've ever seen a societal change happen or happening through the use of data. Have you got a couple of examples that you can think of that you could share?
Yeah, I'd like to make it quite personal, if that's okay. My wife,
Of course.
unfortunately, at a very, very early age, contracted melanoma, skin cancer, 30 plus years ago. And the good news was she got it early. The bad news was she was going to have to live with it for the rest of her life. And again, what in 30 years ago, just about, to go through every single mole and every single freckle and every was actually something that had to be done on a full day. It took a full day with somebody, honestly, Mark, with a magnifying glass.
Wow.
And then it was a bit like when you go and get your teeth, where the dentist calls out molar 3, A17, and the technician says in
Yeah.
good shape or not. That was actually the way. She went in recently for her latest update, and she walked in and out in 20 minutes because there was an AI machine she walked into. It done a full top to bottom assessment of all of her skin, all surfaces. And by the time she left, she was able to have a consultation with her specialist that told her there's no change since 12 months ago. That quickly, they were able to
Wow.
analyze her full body scan because that's the key thing with melanoma and skin cancer is, are any of them changing? Are any of them modifying? Any of them raising? Are they changing shape? Are they changing color? Are they changing density? So effectively, a full day 30 years ago for them then with tolerances, I'm sure the tolerances were huge because it was till last week where she was in and out and home and eating a chicken curry with me by lunchtime. Amazing,
Yeah.
right? That's
Fantastic.
that's the bit, right? That people would say, "Oh, well, that's the machine. That's not data. That's not AI. That's not this, that, and the other." More people equate AI to or data, should I say, and why we need all these centers to social media and things that, if it bleeds, it leads headline type stuff. So I think every single day of every week, we and more we use our phones, which also can be both a weapon of mass invention and also a weapon of mass distraction, right? Isn't that fair
Yeah.
to say? And
Yes.
of course, as fathers, as grandfathers, etc., w- we are of the generation, and particularly journalists, they like to more call it a weapon of mass distraction and how it's causing all the dystopian views of the world. However, there's nothing like being able to go into Dublin town and say, where will I park? Where's the spot? And the car virtually drives me to the spot,
There you go.
saving me an hour of my life driving around.
Well, and stress.
Yeah, yeah, and stress and all that. That's an hour of my life or 40 minutes of my life that isn't coming back, which is facilitated by data, probably an algorithm. And I think the algorithms now, the topical term for it is AI. But as you and I know, Mark, and you even know from your colleagues, the AI is a part of the data set. There's still traditional data, cloud services. Should I say, there's still loads of COBOL out there.
Yeah.
Well,
Oh, geez.
I'm gonna stop twitching now, Mark. Hold on.
It looks like you're coming over to something. Yeah, yeah. It doesn't look good. We'll get you that doctor's appointment through the AI bot in about 10 minutes.
Absolutely. So fundamentally, when you start to frame data as electricity in our minds, then we start to see that electricity, when it evolved, the first thing it did actually, which was really interesting with electricity, is it's amazing how few ghosts there are now since we got rid of candlelight and flickering light. That's just a side product. But when we start to look back, because it's easier for us to have conversations about stuff that's happened and stuff that might happen in the future. And when we look at particularly electricity, you know, the transformative change that it had, it's pervasive. It's everywhere. Now you walk around your life and you say, what has got a plug in it? Well, it's actually what hasn't got a plug on it. And that's effectively, we're at the early start or mid starting stage of that for data. And I heard a wonderful, and I must credit to somebody when I remember, a wonderful um, analogy this weekend only about where we are in AI. And the writer said that, when you have a volcano, before a volcano, there's little tremors. You usually get tremors. We're only at the tremor stage.
Yeah. Yeah,
It's
that's a good
good.
way of framing it. That's a good way of framing it, isn't it?
It's good. It's good because, and at the start of any change, whether it's electricity or not, and I know your organization are huge in electricity and have been since the innovation of the electrons and distribution of electrons, there were also huge amounts of anxiety and scaring and media and, don't allow electrical pylons over your head because basically you get fried and stuff. That usually is shaped by human nature of fear, fight or
Yes.
flight, fight or flight, natural instinct. It also is, we have to be mindful that if something is changing and it's a transformative, it's changing something that's probably making somebody a lot of money. And that's no different than electricity. It's no different with steam. It's no different with cars. Can you imagine the people who were growing the oats around 1900 when they heard that horses were going to be replaced by cars?
Yeah, indeed. Yeah,
Yeah.
indeed. Indeed.
So so we have to be mindful that was 2025 and we have all these amazing tools at our disposal. Human nature is this, in my opinion, my experience, the instincts of human nature in 2025 are the same as 1900. We'll, we'll protect what we have first, and then we'll see, can we dip into this other thing?
Yeah, does it work for us? Does it work for us? And talking of working, Gary, because we've dipped into data center. We've said it a couple of times, but maybe for those that are listening, and are maybe not quite sure, how would you describe a data center to somebody? How would you
As a-
do that? What are
Thank
they?
you. Right. Okay. Well, for the first point, let's split the word into two. Let's split it into data and center. And that makes up the word data center. We spoke mostly on this chat so far about AI and all. That's data, right? That's data. That's basically zeros and ones transitioning in electrons, which is what we put in as the raw material, and photons, which is the thing that goes out of the other side via a router that finds its way to your handheld. Then look at the center. And I think I might have mentioned it already, but to me, a center in 2025 is the physical medium to deliver the data and the advantages. It's the same as a floppy disk was when I came out of college. It wasn't the floppy 5 1/4 floppy or the 3.5 inch floppy. That was the hardware. The software was a Microsoft Word or SuperCalc or really badly constructed COBOL programs. That was the data. So what we have now is, and to many of your listeners, if they're more electrical in bias or if they're more manufacturing in bias, the center is effectively the facilitation of the substation. It aggregates all of these different uh, 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 wires and hardware and software, and then it converts the electrons to the photons, distributes it out, and effectively is like the heartbeat in the middle. But the heart itself is only a muscle. The blood is what's facilitating the body and your fingers and your nails and your hair growing. So the analogy of the body is probably a good one. The physical heart is one thing, that's the center. The blood that actually does all the magic to your fingertips is the data. So it's that bit in the middle that you have to have, and you must have, and it must be available 24/7 in the same way as your heart. If your heart stops beating, it doesn't matter how good your blood is, you're dying,
Yep.
right? You can lose a finger, you can lose a thumb, you can lose a big toe. It's a real inconvenience. I don't recommend it to anyone to go and pursue it, but you can live, can't you?
Yeah, you have a chance. Yeah, you definitely have a chance.
You definitely have a chance. You lose your heart, mm,
That's more problematic. I'll give you that. Can I change this up just a gear or two then? So we've spoken more about what is a data center, how does AI fit. You've given a really good example. And by the way, thank you for sharing that because it's a very close topic to you. So thank you for sharing that for us.
Sure.
Um, let's on the topic of being neighbourly. I'd like to talk more about Ireland, if I may. Um, and let's talk about challenges in infrastructure, energy, sustainability. Um, it seems like, it feels like there's a potential that Ireland could be left behind in this AI race. In your opinion, what do you think needs to change, and what's the consequence if no change happens in Ireland?
Okay, good question, and there are good links back to what we've been discussing. Just, there's a why and there's a what, isn't there, Mark?
Yeah,
And let's start with the why. Why does Ireland right now find itself with nearly 1,400 megawatts, or 21% of our electricity used by the asset class of data centers? Well, actually, to understand that, then you have to actually, again, let's delve slightly into history. And when you consider that when we joined the European Union, Mark, in 1973, our two largest exports were live cattle and people. Live cattle and people. So what basically was put in place was a incentive package to try and facilitate and become a beachhead and a resting place and a launch pad for US multinationals to service the European Union. There's 5 million people in Ireland. There's 500 million people in the European Union, in and around. So it was the obvious thing to do. The first companies that came along were, this will make you and your listeners smile. Diaspora of Irish people who went off there 100 years before. We went out looking for everyone who had an O in their name over in the United States. And if they happen to be a senior executive in an organization, what did you do? And it just so happened, didn't it, that it was the likes of IBM, Digital Equipment Corporation, Motorola, really strong organizations in the IT space. And not only that, we attracted the likes of Sandoz, Pfizer, Johnson and Johnson, and companies that were in the pharmaceutical space. So suddenly now you've got these US companies who wanted to service the European market using Ireland as its base. Now we've layered onto that, obviously, biotech, life sciences, and also in the late 90s we put on the International Financial Services Centre. But if we concentrate just on IT for a moment, again I go back to the physical medium. Most of those dudes that came first were exporting on punch cards or hard disks, or 5 megabits of hard disks was the size of your extension in your house. So when you consider that was DEC and IBM, they were sort of replaced a bit by the likes of Gateway 2000, Dell, who and their other hardware suppliers. And subsequently, then we had the software guys come in, the Microsofts of this world, Apple, hardware and software. And that evolved. So as one went away, Mark, one wave went away, whether it was mainframe, mini computer, personal computer to the cloud, Ireland has remained as that base for these companies. And in and around the 2000s, when people realized that, hey, we're not going to be using these floppy disk CD-ROMs anymore, what are we going to be using? And we're going to be using servers that reside in somebody else's building. And what's that called? A data center. So it's really an evolution. And when I say to people that Ireland was the largest exporter of software in the world in 2001, 2, 3, and 4, it's not hard to understand why, because we were localizing, Mark, all of the software from the American companies, Microsoft, Oracle, Lotus, IBM, etc. So how we find ourselves as being a core location for exporting a data, it's just the evolution of that to a server from a floppy disk. And that's why, unlike, say, Frankfurt, London, Amsterdam, and Paris in Europe, who are fundamentally, if you look at the financial bourses of the old days, that would be where all the telecoms would have crescended into. So it was a natural place for London, Frankfurt, Amsterdam, the big bourses. We're different. So that's how we end up with this challenge of success. And effectively, it's the data that we're interested in, because that's the part that when you add in, Mark, to the other ICT and related services, is Ireland's largest service export. 26% of our exports are data ICT related. To keep the rain off that data or that till, you need to put it into a center. So it's nearly the what and the why. The why is the data. The what is the center. And obviously, this causes challenges when you're trying to scale one industry while the other one is just trying to catch up with itself,
Yeah.
i.e., data and electrical infrastructure.
What do you think is the challenge if, if Ireland doesn't get on board quickly? Because you made the comment, well, you didn't actually. You said that somebody made a comment to you over the weekend about the volcano just
Mm.
tremoring a little bit at the minute. What happens? What happens if Ireland's not ready for the explosion when it comes, or even the small tremors now?
I mean, we could all be big headed and say the whole thing is going to collapse. Of course, it's not going to collapse. But after 60 years of doing the right thing in advance, why would you? And again, I'm always careful these in 2025 now to be as politically correct as I can. But there was an old rule when we were all hustling for in nightclubs. You never allow anyone else buy your girlfriend a drink, right? And why would you open the door when you have all the facilitations of access to renewable energy that you're just not harvesting? A huge pedigree in data that you can build the centers and harvest that. So what's happening is twofold. One, we're not even on the list right now for the design and the hosting of the data. Therefore, other geographic locations are getting to court your girlfriend. The second thing is, which is even more concerning, is if you looked at the airport on any given day in Dublin Airport, Cork Airport, Waterford, and Belfast, and over in Knock, it's full of our talented people designing, building, and operating centres everywhere else. And what we're doing is we're indirectly now, as I said earlier, we two exports in 1973, people and cattle. We're now indirectly exporting all this talent again in a different way. So all that talent, they're young people who are settling and they're going to look at places like Denmark and look at places of all wherever, Athens even, Italy. So I think indirectly it's forgetting about the fundamentals of the economy has gone from cattle and people 1973 to 2025 when we are according to some metrics one of the top end of GDP, etc. And when you stop doing the right things in advance, as one of our great soccer warriors in Ireland, Roy Keane said, fail to prepare, prepare to fail. Yeah. And you need to stay ahead of it. You need to be able to demonstrate to people, industry particularly, you're listening, you're acting, you're
Yeah,
executing.
yeah,
And when that goes, you lose trust. You lose trust in your organization. If enough of your clients tell you, Mark, that this is what we need by X, then you probably are able to do a business case to go back to your organization and say, I have not just one, but 20 clients saying, if we do this in X, we will stay in the game.
yeah.
It's when you don't listen and you don't deliver, the client loses trust with you. And once trust goes, it's so much harder to get back. So
Yeah, agreed.
Ireland, unfortunately, we've spent 10 years since the Apple announcement when we effectively got a vortex into the future, didn't we?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah, exactly, exactly,
10
exactly.
years ago. Exactly. 10 years ago, we were, I mean, that's a time when a 20 meg data center was a big deal, right? And this was to be a 500 megawatt data center in a remote location with all infrastructure built up. And, we didn't seize on that. We didn't see the opportunity. And that all saying, the best time to get ourselves aligned with our renewable energy to our renewable data centers would have been 10 years ago. But the second best time is now. And with that, you have to then start. We're trying to shape our data strategy with our electricity strategy, whereas it has to be an aligned strategy. If you look globally at any industry, any country, any sector, wherever, there are two global megatrends, aren't there? They may call it different: decarbonisation and digitalization. They are two, Davos, it's all about that. You go to the US and even there last week, AI and the big announcements in France, etc. It's all about how do we use digitalization to decarbonize. And, again, for your listeners, we're using a lot of technical terms. anything that says smart, anything you buy in 2025 that says smart in it, smart car, smart device, smart heat pump, smart, it's only smart because of one thing: data. It's a piece of hardware with
It's a
data,
fact, Gary.
right? So when you see things like a smart grid, smart electrical grid, it actually is still, if you were to show someone to 2025, 2020, 2020 grid, you'll see lots of wires, you'll see substations, and they'll be saying, how is that smart versus that's not smart? It's
Yeah,
actually
yeah, exactly.
it's the data, right?
Well, I think you're touching on a really important point here, Gary, which is, there's also a lot of talk globally around exactly what you just said: decarbonisation and digitalisation to have an impact both, and it's not just in data centers. I think you made this point earlier, right? Data centers solves for a number of different areas, and Scope 3 is obviously a clear outcome and output from a data center as well. Do you feel, and I take Ireland out of this right now, just globally, holistically in our industry, do you feel that we tell the story well enough around what we're doing in data centers to have the impact both within our own kind of sector and driving out, carbon in a number of different ways? Hey, so we think about carbon from a use of electricity. I think about carbon from embodied carbon inside some of our products and solutions. I think about shipping products around the world. There are so many different topics that wrap into this decarbonisation headline. Do you think we can lead on this? Is this something that the data center industry should and could lead on?
It's a great question. And I'm around the block a while to realize that words matter, perception matters. The first movie I can remember in my life was Jaws, 1976, 1977.
Nice. Good classic
And I
film.
was, to this day, Mark, to this day, I can't put my toes into water anywhere without thinking of that big shark coming along and biting my leg off. We didn't know in 1976, Mark, we didn't know anything. We didn't have David Attenborough on stream. We had the odd show. We had the odd show telling us about sharks and stuff like that. So when this movie came out, guess what? We thought that every ocean, every sea, everywhere was surrounded by great white sharks, right? And even today in 2025, you and I, or people of a certain age, genie Mac, holy yeah, oh God, sharks, the whole lot. Even though now we know that a little fly called a mosquito kills 500,000 people down in the world, whereas a shark, less than five. Yeah. So why do I say that? I think data centers have become globally that get out of jail card. They're the great white shark. Oh, you can't upgrade your grid. We stopped demand. Oh, we can't do this. We can't do that. Oh, AI did. It actually is just the canary in the coal mine. And to listeners that don't understand that, going back to our history thing, they used to bring canaries down to the coal mine in case of gas leaks. And if the canary died, he had a higher sense. So the miners were able to get out early, right? So what have data centers done? They've actually highlighted the growth in electricity requirements. And it's very, very difficult when you're going through change in industrial ages. It's like trying to put a Ferrari, if we were trying to go to automotion in the 1900s and we were replacing trains, yeah? It's like putting a Ferrari on a rail track. Or it's like putting a Model T on a rail track. It's very, very difficult. In fact, why would you do it? That's why we built roads. And the speed by which we're looking to build the roads, in that same analogy for the cars to replace the horses, is just not at the same tempo as what we're used to when we're building out infrastructure. So I think it's an ideology, plus it's an early, easy get out of jail card for a lot of particularly state-run organizations. It's a global challenge. And that's just for the centers. But what we don't do well, and I think this is one of the things that we have to, and only time will do it, is that if you can think of a weighing scales, and on one side you have the carbon intensity of the center and put all the carbon in that. We have to be able to then say, well, if some of the data in that center is going to smarten up the grid and reduce its
Hmm.
carbon intensity by 40%, then surely it should go on the other weighing scale of it. And
Correct.
that's where there's some good stuff coming out of uh, the World Economic Forum, where they're saying centers are X. The data in the centers are giving the smarts to this industry, the steel industry, the automotive industry,
Indeed.
and yeah, and we'll eventually see, and hopefully we'll find that the delta is very large between what the data is reducing versus what the centers are producing.
And I'm looking forward to that. I'm actually looking forward to the outcome of some of the fruit on this, Gary, because we see it, and in my previous role, I saw it more frequently in manufacturing, where the
Yeah.
data was driving out carbon, it was driving out cost, and to the tune of about 20% on somebody's energy bill. When you think about that is significant. It's not just 1 or 2%. You're talking significant amounts of carbon and money. So I'm looking forward to seeing what that will do for us in the future. And talking about the future, Gary, you've been around this industry a little while. What do you think the future holds? And I'd really like to ask you, actually, what's the most important lesson that you've learned and will carry forward over this period?
The most I'm going to call back right now, this year. I'm going to go back and use the suffragettes. What we now need from global statespeople is what the suffragettes said. We need deeds now, not words, Mr. President. Is that we are running the risk, geographic locations, continent locations, etc., of talking about something as if that means the intent, and then going back and looking at lobby groups and talking to people about what will be destroyed if we don't. Guess what? Somebody had to look outside the cave 40,000 years ago and say, I don't want to live with my 4 generations of family anymore. I'm going over there and I'm going to live in my own cave. And that basically is what you call it. We need to broaden our horizons. We need to look at sort of the potential. My own thing that I've learned over the years is more, there are people that do, and there are people that talk about doing. And right now we need to, as quickly as possible, get those two sets of people respectfully together on a table, around a table, and say, what's our North Star? What's our desire? What's our collective desire? And that is probably the hardest thing we can do now at the moment. Because what I've noticed, what over the last 20 years in particular, is everybody seems to be polarized on a position, on everything. We had a bit of crack earlier about Arsenal, my team, and your team. That's been a wonderful banter. Sport is a wonderful banter because 99.9% of people who watch sport uh, have great banter around it. But we'll always be persuaded after probably a few pints that the other team was better. But that wonderful banter and that camaraderie, what is it that binds us together? It's not our teams, it's the sport of soccer, football. Yeah. We're not actually polarized. What's bringing us we just happen to have a bias towards one of the teams, but we're quite happy eventually to say, oh, it was a great match though, wasn't it? Gee, superb. Yeah, wonderful. We don't seem to have that anymore. Everybody has to win on each side. So I think what I've learned is that communication, talking is the key thing. Always be prepared to be in the gray zone. Reserve the right to end up in a different position. Um, and that certainly doesn't happen on social media. That happens in person. That happens when we come together physically. And in a world where you and I are building communications platforms to allow people to do whatever they want to do wherever, it's probably more important than ever, that we actually balance that with in person, being
Yes.
together, having the crack, having the banter, talking about other stuff, um, and not being polarized. And we have a weapon of mass distraction in our keyboard and our screen. Um, so so I think going back to first print, I know it's out of date now, and I don't want to become that guy. I don't want to become a die, But, some of the first principles, let's go back to them.
Ga
Um,
Gary, I
yeah.
think you've just highlighted there. I think we started the beginning of this podcast where you were talking about your ability as a programmer, and what you really found was your ability as a communicator and bringing people together. And it's a fine ending to the pod, really, because you said the same thing at the end, which is actually we need to communicate better with each other. We need to tell each other a better story. And I agree with you. I think there's a world where everybody wins is not a true reflection. Um, and I often use the pH analogy in water from pH 1 to 13. And where you started off on pH 1, if you get to pH 4 and the other person drops to pH 9, but you found a solution, that
Mm.
solution is a good solution. It is a good solution. So, Gary, I just wanted to say it's been a fascinating conversation, this, and thank you for sharing your wisdom and history. A good history lesson, by the way. I thoroughly enjoyed that. And I look forward to driving this industry forward with you over the next few years. But thank you for joining me on the pod this morning.
No, you're very welcome. You're a fine interviewer. You have a lovely style. I enjoyed it. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Gary.